We are now in the stage where we still are interacting with NGOs, and I'm very happy to introduce Anurag Sen, Regional Director, if I'm not wrong, of Helpage India, works for the cause of the elderly. Helpage India is an organization, country over, world over that works for the cause of
Helpage India.
Helpage India works for the cause of the elderly. You probably won't believe, but while we are the youngest country of the world, or one of the youngest countries of the world, we are also having a very significant population of the elderly. And these people are very often at a loss once they retire, because this country has almost no social security. So therefore, how do elderly people fare? What is their plight? What are the issues? And rather we talk about it. And we have Sini, Child in Need Institute. We have Moitri and Nilanjana. They will talk about Sini. And as I said, Sini has been working closely with IIM Calcutta for many, many years. Not only for this course, but much before. When I floated this course, Sini was one organization that was already working with IIMC, with the professor of IIMC from long before that. So because geographically, logistically, one of their offices is close by, so therefore Sini has networked very closely, very naturally, and we work with children, as you can well understand. But before I hand over for their presentation, I just wanted to touch base with all of you as to where we stand in the course, and talk about the fact that we can relate certain things that we've talked about with what's actually happening. All right. So we have just written down, we've met 4 NGOs so far, right from day one. It's been Touch World, Indian Institute of Mother and Child, Cry, and Switch On. Okay. Now the presentation that I have quickly made, the topic was this: role of NGOs in India's development. Can anybody in a brief way tell me how each one of these NGOs have contributed to India's development? You've heard from all of them, so I'm not asking you the details of what they do, but how in their absence, how would India's development have been affected? Anybody? Pick an NGO that you want to talk about, tell me. What about Touch World? How has it contributed to India's development? Or what about IIMC? What about Cry? What about Switch On? Yes, please.
Certain people after so it's contribute to the lives of
Yes. You see, one of the things is that we, if I take, let's say, the first one, Touch World, if this would not happen, if the convicts of the jail came out still with very hardened and criminal-like minds, with a lot of revenge, a feeling of injustice, the feeling that society has wronged them, then what would they do? They would go back to what they were familiar with. Whether it is rape or arson or murder or looting or any of those, kinds of things. And also, we need to remember that one of the things that is a big scourge of the whole world now, across the world, is terrorism. So, in that kind of a world, unless you can calm emotions and induce an element of love in people, terrorists find a very easy place to come to. The other thing, of course, why the significance of Touch World in a place like Calcutta is simply because what I had told you much earlier, that we are actually a border state. If you might remember, we have Bangladesh in the east, we have Nepal and Bhutan in the north, and further, slightly up north, is Tibet, quote-unquote, China. In that kind of a scenario, terrorism is not something unheard of. In Bangladesh, there was an incident in a coffee shop or bakery where many people lost their lives very systematically. Very often, writers, intellectuals are killed at gunpoint, and it's the well, you can call them terrorists. If you look at, Sikkim, Nepal, China, Nepal has been through turbulent times from the monarchy till now. There's a lot of conflict between the plains people and the hills people, and further up north is Tibet and occupied by China. So, in all, terrorism, and China itself has its own issues from Tibetan refugees as well as Uyghur refugees. So this is an area which is extremely disturbed, the surrounding, not necessarily in the city or most part of the state. Further east, as you go from Bangladesh, there are 7 little hill states which some of them have never really completely integrated with mainstream India. Geographically, they are separated, and there is terrorism, there is conflict, and sometimes when those terrorists are caught, they are caught here. Because relatively speaking, in the whole region, this is a little quiet and calm. So it's very important, if you will, to keep the peace here. Otherwise, this region will get completely unsettled. So that's a little bit about Dutch work. What about IIMC? In what way has it contributed to India's development? Indian Institute of Mother and Child. Yes, please.
Yes, try to provide better healthcare.
Yes. And probably inspired others, introduced people to the problems of rural health. Because, public health, as they described, is abysmal here. And finally, what does every human being ask for? Fundamentally, a shelter, just 2 meals or at least enough to eat every day, the ability to educate their children, and if they fall ill, then to go to a hospital and get treatment. In India, you may or may not know, if you look up statistics, medical insurance is still very low. The penetration of medical insurance is very low. When people fall ill, then they sell off everything they have. That means sometimes you sell off even houses or whatever you have, even the utensils in the house, and you try to treat them. So it's terrible. Add to that a terrible rural health infrastructure. So when an initiative like IIMC comes in, it contributes significantly, because if we are not able to provide these basics almost 70 years, more than 70 years after India's independence, then we have no right to call ourselves independent. Furthermore, it increases the gulf between person and person. If you have that kind of a feeling, you can't have development. After all, development is not just about capital markets. Development is not just about making rich people richer, they will get richer anyway. But unless you provide a certain level of equity in the population, unless people down the ladder economically, they feel that they are not being cheated by the rest of their fellow men, by the rest of the citizens of the country. Once upon a time there was religious persecution or caste persecution, but what is happening today is very different. Lack of access to public health is a serious issue, because it compromises people's lives. People die, and they die in a very, very sorry state. So even if this is one initiative, the other day, if you remember, Dr. Sujit was telling you that among NGOs, he thinks, of course there's no documented thing, but he thinks that they are the biggest in this part of the country. And not only that, the model that he's suggesting inspires others to set up things like him. He was explaining to me that day that, 2 of his batchmates, one is Dr. Kunal Sarkar, I don't know that whether there's anybody from Calcutta. Dr. Kunal Sarkar is currently with Medica. He's an excellent debater, he's a very great public persona, and of course he's a cardiac surgeon. And there's another person he talked about, and they're all batchmates. And he said that earlier, Dr. Sarkar and these other friends of his would ridicule him, that you were having a happy life in Belgium, why did you come back? And he defended himself lamely. But he said, lately, now that I'm getting older and my batchmates are getting older, they say, Dr. Sujit, you are doing something far more worthwhile than we have achieved in our lifetime. Yes, we have become big doctors. Yes, we earn a lot of money. Yes, people know us at the drop of a hat. We get patients. We have a good hospital infrastructure. But our achievements fall far short of yours. And he was explaining. This was over a cup of coffee at the end of the class. So, if you will, this is something that this nation has to address. Unlike China, where all said and done, whatever the system may be, the state provides for education, the state provides for public health. In India, although theoretically the government is supposed to provide, what it actually provides falls far short of what people really need, particularly in India's villages. And therefore, I think it's very, very useful to look at their contribution. What about CRY? How has that contributed? Several things. Yes, please.
So, CRY is the association that helps the children on the streets.
Yes. Not just on the streets, but more than that.
Yeah. Help them going to school, so in that way it also has contributed to equalize the level of education in India.
Well, there are a few more things, if you will. They have helped reduce child trafficking. They have helped reduce child labor. They have, when children are in difficulty, they can be contacted. They act, they mediate between the police and law enforcement agencies and these children who otherwise don't have a voice. And the other thing very significant, if you remember in the CRY presentation, they said right in the beginning, earlier they were doing child relief. It was child relief and youth. It became child rights and youth. So therefore, reinforcing the rights of the child, making sure that everybody, right from people high up there in government to the ordinary citizen, everybody is aware of what children really need, because they are the future of the nation. And if you have a whole generation of people who are lost or trafficked or in labor or abused, can you imagine what it will do? Not just to our country, but it's a population. People live, they'll find their way. It's terrible. So CRY has contributed significantly. We know them for other reasons, greetings cards and whatever, but those are small avenues. But reinforcement of child rights across India, they are also, if you remember, but I'll come to that later. What about switch on? The other presentation we had last class. How have they contributed? Or how are they contributing? Yes?
So Switch On was the association about introducing electricity.
Renewable energy. Basically renewable energy, primary focus on solar energy, not so much on wind. And they have a sister organization that looks after organic farming. Again, very, very significant thing, because most of our food, I'm starting the other way around, is full of pesticides, and that can have long-term health, can damage health in the long term. And as a country, we are short of. India does not have significant petroleum reserves. This country's economy is dependent on two things. One is a good rainfall, which only God can help every year, and governments rise and fall on the basis of whether you had a good monsoon or not a good monsoon. And the other thing is that we have hardly any petroleum reserves, and we are an energy-starved country, exactly like China, but without the kind of reach that China has acquired in Africa or wherever. So unless we are able to very quickly come up with alternatives to petroleum, we will be in dire trouble. That's why particularly the national government today has been very active in setting up what is called the ISL, the International Solar Alliance. The French president was here earlier in the year to champion that. That's one of the areas where we feel this is a country where sunlight is significant everywhere. So if that can be converted, you see, wind energy is only significant around the coast. We are a peninsula. So if wind energy around the coast and solar energy across the country can be converted significantly into electricity, along with hydropower in the northeast of India, then over a period of time, we can provide a alternative to coal-based power generation or oil-based, petroleum-based power generation. So it's a very, very significant thing. We are very far away from it, but unless something great happens, this economy is absolutely vulnerable. Any day, petroleum prices going up, the nation is complaining. The last couple of weeks, if you have seen newspapers, you'll see petrol and diesel prices skyrocketing and people complaining, including somebody like Yoga Guru Ramdev saying this government has danger because it has effects on inflation, it has effects on everything, because where transport prices are regulated, like here, bus prices and so on and so forth, taxis complaining, buses complaining, trucks lining up the road and not being able to move, because ultimately people have to pay up. So runaway inflation. So basically, this is one cause that also has a very significant impact. So when we selected NGOs, it's also to keep in mind that it's not just NGOs, they play a role in India's development. And why do NGOs have to do it? It's something we said earlier, because government in our country doesn't do enough. Not only that, as a nation, I think we have many Indians here, they can vouch for me, we don't necessarily like the government's initiatives. We don't always believe that they have the best quality that can be provided. Air India is a case in point. It's there flying. I don't know how many of my Indian friends here travel Air India. Is there anybody? Can you raise your hands? You travel Air India when you go? No. I'm not talking. I'm talking about Indians traveling Air India. Within India. Within India. Significant, you don't travel anything else?
No. Something I have traveled in Air India.
Yeah, you have traveled. But if airline of choice Air India, how many of my Indian friends here have only been to government schools? Government-run schools? One. So you see, basically it's not that all government is bad. But the point is, as a nation, we have learned to trust the private sector more. In fact, we have been unfair, in my opinion, to government agencies. HMT was a very famous watch company. They did other things. But HMT very soon, one day, gave way to Titan. Does anybody wear an HMT watch? HMT is probably sold off or hived off, or I don't know what has happened to HMT. So we as a nation have a bias towards what is private initiative, for good and not so good reasons. So therefore, if the government has to retreat or the government is not able to do, these are areas that corporates can't do. But unless NGOs contribute here, the nation cannot move on. There is just no way. Anyway, I will stop here. And once again, welcome to Anuragha Sen of Heritage India. Let me give you this to start with. Little gratitude. Anuragha.